The regime is facing serious crisis, both at home and in the region. Hamas is almost eliminated. Hezbollah's power is degraded. They are seriously weakened, but they are still alive. Ayatollah Khamenei and other regime leaders promised to resurrect them. I believe them.
Welcome back to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique, and in today's episode, I am joined by my colleague Farhad Rezaei to discuss President Trump's recent announcement and executive order, which is to carry out a maximum pressure campaign against the Iranian regime, both as a threat that they pose to United States security, the region at large, and their own people. President Trump did make it clear that he is interested in negotiating a new nuclear deal with the Iranian regime. And Farhad is going to walk us through what some of the signaling he has done over the last 2 weeks of his current administration might mean when it comes to talks and the negotiations he seeks to have with the regime. Farhad is quite adamant that whatever steps President Trump takes moving forward in regards to Iran, that it needs to be a hardline approach. We saw with the last Biden administration that negotiations and diplomacy utterly failed and ended up only empowering and legitimizing the regime. And following those negotiations, we had October 7th. So we're going to look at what President Trump's executive order means, what some of this initial rhetoric might imply as far as the rest of his 4 years in office, and what he aims to do, not just with Iran, but the region at large. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Farhad, welcome back to the Philos Project podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Hello, Dominique. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And so for our audience who maybe hasn't been here since the podcast has grown a lot, Farhad is our expert in Iran, our fellow dealing with this specific issue, which is important to talk about this week because President Trump has signed a memorandum, essentially like an executive order stating his administration's policy towards Iran, which is increasing or reimposing maximum pressure against the regime, which is quite different from the Biden administration's approach. So before we talk about news coming out of the Oval Office this week as it pertains to Iran, I thought maybe we could do an overview and contrast the Biden administration with the Trump administration.
Well, what happened during the Biden administration and that 4 years, it was actually a reversal of what President Trump did during his first administration. He basically loosened the maximum pressure campaign imposed on the Islamic Republic by President Trump. He allowed the regime to sell its oil over 1.5 million to Chinese and some other regional countries. He waived sanctions on some of the regional countries who deal with Iran. He provided Iran with billions of dollars. Most of that money went to the terror groups in the region, especially Hezbollah and Hamas, who carried out the October 7 attack on Israelis and killed over 1,200 Israelis and so on. So that was the Biden administration, basically. But now, compared to the 1 week of President Trump, probably is not sound for now because it's just been 1 week. And as you mentioned, President Trump signed a memorandum of an executive order. We still have to wait until, basically, I welcome this decision, but still, although in the memorandum mentioned that he wants to reimpose sanctions on Iran because of number of issues, namely the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, and Iran's destructive regional behavior, namely sponsorship of terrorism. But I also have some sort of concern, and my concern is that he basically communicated to the Iranians that he's only concerned about the nuclear program. Obviously, Iran is not just a nuclear program issue. It's not a nuclear dossier. There are some serious issues with the Islamic Republic. The nuclear program is the most strategic and the existential one. I admit that. But also the ballistic missile program is challenging, and it's not to mention that it's one of the components of the nuclear program, and that should also be addressed. And the regime's sponsorship of terrorism, supporting proxy wars against Israel. That's another serious challenge that should be addressed. Again, although it's been mentioned in the text of the memorandum, but President Trump verbally communicated that he's only concerned about the nuclear program.
I have the executive order here, the National Security Presidential Memorandum. Memorandum is similar to an executive order. Essentially, this is President Trump putting forth what his administration's policy will be towards Iran. And you mentioned the nuclear program, Farhad. He also kind of breaks down the direct security threat that Iran poses to the United States. Primarily, he mentions their cybersecurity threats. And then he also highlights the responsibility Iran has in the horrific attack on October 7th by funding Gaza as a major proxy in the region. So, kind of the role they've played in the instability and the chaos that has ensued over the last 15 months with the war, but also over the last 4 years. And he also mentions briefly the, you know, egregious violations of human rights against the Iranian people as well. And then he goes into the nuclear program, as you mentioned. But I kind of want to ask you, in light of this memorandum, what you think the regime's response will be, as well as, what is their plan going to be over the next 4 years with Trump in office, or what do you anticipate their response?
Look, what is really important, I mean, first of all, we have to look at the regime's situation. The regime is facing serious crisis, both at home and in the region. In the region, its terror proxies are degraded. Hamas is almost eliminated, not entirely, but its military power is degraded. Hezbollah, the same. Hezbollah's power is degraded. They are not serious threats to to Israel as they were before, but they are still there. I mean, I understand that they are seriously weakened, but they are still alive. And Ayatollah Khamenei and other regime leaders promised to resurrect them. And I mean, I believe them. That's what they have been doing. Their proxy power, whenever they were weakened, they try to resurrect them. So the regime is weakened abroad. Inside the country, they are also weakened. There is a serious economic crisis. There are some other crises that the regime is facing: the environmental crisis, social crisis, political crisis. Generally speaking, the regime is weakened, and it's my understanding that if Trump administration reimposes its maximum pressure campaign, the regime would not be able to do anything. And I need to emphasize that the new maximum pressure campaign should be far different from what it was during the first term of President Donald Trump. Why it should be different? Because the regime is now in a different situation. And by that, I mean the nuclear program. The nuclear program is far more advanced. According to the latest report by the International Atomic Energy Agency and also the reports from the intelligence agencies, Iran is now in a far more different situation. It is able to produce nuclear weapon. It is able to produce highly enriched uranium for several nuclear warheads in 1 week. So if Donald Trump is serious about reimposing of its maximum pressure campaign, it should be far more different. It should be far more crippling, so that the regime would not be able to to move ahead with its destructive policies and to move ahead with its nuclear program.
So do you think President Trump's end game is specifically the nuclear program, or do you think he'll push for some sort of regime change in Iran? I thought it was interesting, and we've talked about it here on the podcast before, that Netanyahu addressed the people of Iran directly in an X video, essentially saying that they are supported by Israel, which I thought was quite genius of Netanyahu, because not only is he putting military external pressure on the regime, but also pressure internally by encouraging some sort of dissent or pressure for regime change. So do you think that President Trump will kind of take up the mantle of that? I thought that was a genius strategy on the part of Netanyahu a few months ago. And I'm curious to see if President Trump will kind of carry that through and then also put pressure domestically on the regime.
Look, I personally do not know what is the end game for President Trump. As I said, so far, at least in this few days, he sends out mixed signals. I don't really know if this is a tactic that he wants to confuse the regime, or no, he is just interested in solving the nuclear crisis, and he's just going to let the other issues like the ballistic missile program, the regime's sponsorship of terrorism, the regime's violation of human rights, just to simply let them go. I understand that there are some people around him that are, somehow advising him, or they are going to advise him that the nuclear threat is more existential, it's more compelling, it should be solved, and over time we can deal with other issues. But I think this would be a misguided strategy. This would be wrong, because not only this regime would not abandon the nuclear program, but it also a serious threat to the United States when it comes to other issues like the ballistic missile program. Recently, there was a report that they are working on building intercontinental ballistic missiles that are able to reach the United States. So what I'm trying to say is that Iran is not only a threat to Israel, the United States' strongest ally, but it poses a threat to the United States itself. So I believe President Trump should just, abandon the idea of, getting into negotiation with the regime, because negotiation with the regime doesn't work. I mean, look at the history of the Islamic Republic. Since 1979 that this regime came to power, several U.S. Presidents wanted to accommodate the Islamic Republic, namely President Bill Clinton and also President Biden, who was really, hoping that if he loosens sanctions, he can convince the Islamic Republic coming back to the negotiation table. But it did not happen, because that's the regime's strategy, that the moment it notices weakness in the United States, it gets emboldened and it moves ahead with its destructive policies. But when it sees seriousness in the United States, it will back off. So again, President Trump sends out mixed signals. For example, recently there was a session and UN Human Rights Council, and President Trump did not censure the regime. This could be a signal to the regime that President Trump is serious about talks with Iran. Or also he lifted security measures around some of the people, including Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, who were under threat by the Islamic Republic. He lifted those security measures around them. Maybe this could be a signal to the Iranian regime that he wants to distance himself from these people, and he's serious about negotiation with the regime. Also, another signal was, the appointment of a person, and I think his name is Michael Dimino, and as the Undersecretary of Defense, and he is the one who believes that countering the Islamic Republic doesn't worth it. The United States should negotiate with the Islamic regime, and I mean, these are the mixed signals that President Trump sends to the Iranian regime, that he wants to negotiate. But even if he wants to negotiate, I respect that decision, but still he has to understand that negotiation should not take long, because it's the Iranian regime's strategy that wants talk for the sake of talks, so that it will find enough time and enough space that it can finish its nuclear program. It can eventually break out with the nuclear warhead. So if President Trump wants to negotiate, that should not take such a long time, and it should be, in a short period of time, so that the Iranian regime would not use that opportunity in their own favor.
Yes, and I just want to remind the audience that, former President Biden, did attempt to reach some sort of a nuclear deal mixed in with a hostage exchange, mixed in with releasing billions of dollars to Iran. And it turned out to just be a really costly prisoner exchange where we essentially paid off the regime, but we also, in the process, emboldened them and legitimized them. And so that was a failed attempt at negotiating, as you mentioned, with the regime. And so I do hope that President Trump, I believe his negotiation skills are much stronger than the former President Biden administration was and what they demonstrated their capabilities to be. But as you're noting for the audience, which I just want to emphasize, is that the regime is not interested in negotiating. And similarly, we've seen that ideology carried through with Hamas in the last 15 months. They were very uninterested in reaching any sort of a hostage deal. And if you look at the hostage, negotiation that did end up going through, it's quite fragile. Even to this day, it's kind of slowly progressing, but at any point it could be spoiled. And the hostage deal that ended up being approved was the same one that was on the table on October 8th. So there was really no, big negotiation wins with Hamas, which, upholds and espouses a very similar ideology to Iran. And Iran has also demonstrated that they're willing to impose attrition until, their demands diplomatically at least are met. So I do think that, President Trump should arrive to some sort of at least an aim, a policy objective before, the regime has more time to acquire nuclear weapons. And it will be quite interesting to see if he pursues diplomacy or more hardlined strategies such as, maximum security sanctions, which it does seem that is part of his tactic moving forward. Farhad, I wanted to ask you one question. Obviously, we noted that Iran is in a much more precarious situation today than they were at the beginning of the Biden administration. And we know that Iran was a big driving force in the region for the security pact or um, the security of other Arab nations against Iran. So that's why partnering with Israel was very attractive. So does the weakening of Iran today make the Abraham Accords or expanding the Abraham Accords less attractive to countries like Saudi Arabia, in your opinion? That's just something I've been thinking about uh, with Trump's recent, rhetoric surrounding Iran and what that means for just larger normalization in the region.
Look, Iran is weakened, as I mentioned and as you mentioned. Iran is weakened. There are multiple crises at home. Its proxy power have been degraded, and its air defense also destroyed. It is in a much weaker position, but that doesn't mean the regime is, not in a position that, can interfere in the affairs of other countries. It cannot be a threat to the United States. It cannot be a threat to Israel and other regional countries. I believe Iran is still in a position that can, torpedo any deal between Israel and regional countries, especially Saudi Arabia. What President Trump can do is just to reimpose the maximum pressure campaign much stronger than what it was before, and to sustain this pressure as long as the regime is, can be pushed to the brink of the collapse. Again, this is not something, far-fetched. The regime is really weak, regionally and at home. Every day we can see protests. Every day. This is something, the social unrest is something usual. And if it gained momentum, if President Trump publicly announced its support for the Iranian people, I am really, really, confident that the change will happen. So once again, to answer your question, that whether in this condition regional countries and Israel can continue with their Abraham Accords, I would say that as long as the regime is in power in Iran, peace will not establish in the Middle East. That's very unfortunate, but that's the reality. Peace will come to the Middle East when the Islamic regime collapses. And this is not something impossible. It is possible. There has been a lot of things in the Middle East and also in the United States that many people thought it's impossible, but it happened eventually. This will happen with the Islamic Republic as well. Once the regime collapses, peace will come to the Middle East between Israel and its regional neighbors.
I'm very curious about Saudi Arabia because I know they're really attracted to some sort of a security pact, and there's obviously the Palestinian question as well that really hinders those negotiations. But I think they're really drawn to normalization with Israel by way of a U.S. security pact because of the threat of Iran. And so, what you're saying is that Iran is still enough of a threat, even in that weakened state, to maybe still be attractive for Saudi Arabia to engage in some sort of security negotiation or pact with the United States.
Look, for Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian issue is not a problem. I said that before, I say it right now, and I will say it many times. That's not a big issue for them. Even Saudi Arabia was willing to, to normalize with Israel before United Arab Emirates and the other members of the Abraham Accords. Their main obstacle is the Islamic regime in Iran. They are really scared of Iran, and they know that if they move ahead with normalization with Israel, Iranians would not let them do that. Remember, in 2019, they attacked the Aramco oil facilities through Houthis, and they shut down half of the oil production of Saudis. They can do that again. Again, Iran is weakened, but it's not destroyed entirely, right? The threat is still there, and Saudis are much scared of that. So the Palestinian issue is not a big issue for Saudis. The real problem is the Islamic Republic, I think.
That's so interesting because that's also one of their driving interests in creating some sort of a security pact is to be on the side of the West against Iran and whatever rogue acts they might inflict as attrition or punishment for Saudi Arabia normalizing. That's really fascinating.
Right. That's right. Because look, I have heard from a lot of Saudi politicians who said that they are, they're not going to sacrifice their national interest for the Palestinians anymore, for the mistakes that the Palestinian leaders made anymore. So for them, Palestinian issue is not a real problem. The real problem is the Islamic Republic. I need to emphasize that.
So in closing, Farhad, I just would ask you, so if you were to advise, President Trump and say, this is a great step forward, a maximum, campaign against the regime is the correct thing to do, what would you emphasize to President Trump or just to the policy community in next steps when it comes to the specifics of what that maximum pressure campaign might look like or should look like?
I will tell him that the Islamic Republic is weakened. Its power at home and in the region is degraded. And a regime that is weakened is not, a good partner to bring it back to the negotiating table. You should keep pressuring. You should sustain pressure on the Islamic Republic unless it makes serious concessions and publicly announce the United States support for the Iranian people to change the regime.
Well, thank you so much, Farhad. I appreciate you, kind of breaking down the initial rhetoric surrounding what this campaign against the Iranian regime might look like. And I'm sure in the coming, it feels like the current administration is moving quite fast. So there could even be updates in the coming days or after the weekend. So we'll follow up on the details of what this, maximum campaign against the regime will look like. So thank you so much, Farhad. Do you have any papers that you've written or articles that you want to point the audience to before we close?
Well, I recently published a piece with the with Frown Page. I think that would be a good read for audience if they are interested about what would be the Islamic Republic's next move as a response to to President Trump's maximum pressure. That could be a read in the weekend if they have time.
Perfect. And maybe we can do a whole podcast episode on that specifically as well. So I'll link that article in the description box down below. Thank you so much for coming on, Farhad.
Thank you very much, Dominique.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you would like to learn more about the region, I encourage you to check out our Pathfinder courses, fully subsidized crash courses on topics concerning the region, including religion, comparative politics, case studies on specific countries, as well as a course on regional security dynamics. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Please comment, like, and subscribe to the Philos Project channel for more content from myself and my amazing colleagues. We also have an Instagram page where we'll post infographics on different topics. There are really great sound bites on specific policies or events happening in the Middle East, as well as here in the United States as it concerns to the Middle East, which are really great kind of short briefs if you're interested in learning more about topics that concern the region and our role as Americans or why we should care. I will leave a giving link in the description box down below. The Philos Project is a nonprofit, and if you feel so led to give, we would appreciate that. I'll see you in the next episode.